Well, I'm excited to have my friend Eugene with me today. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Um, you have lived, in my opinion, like the quintessential Korean American life that I did not live. You went to school, became a pharmacist, and you just threw it all away. No, I'm just kidding. You didn't throw it all away, but you changed like the direction of your life. Um, when you look back on that, why did you go into pharmacy?
In short, money. I grew
Okay.
up pretty poor, and it was in the Korean newspaper at the time growing up. Pharmacist is one of the best jobs at the
Oh, it
current time.
was really okay. I don't
Yeah.
remember that.
The irony was by the time I graduated, there were no jobs left. It was too saturated. There were too many pharmacists by that point because of messages like that.
So, did your parents want you to do that or you wanted to do it?
It was me. Yeah. My
Okay.
my mom was just like, "What? Like I didn't think you would go into
Really?
healthcare and stuff like that."
Uh-huh.
Yeah. They were very yeah, my mom was very like trusting of me of my decisions.
Oh, so you were not okay. So you were not my parents were the same. They did not tell me to do a certain they did
Yeah,
not typically tell me to become a doctor or a lawyer or something like that,
right.
right? So, how long did you do that until you realized like this is not what I want to do?
Yeah, so I barely got by my pharmacy school. I think if I like had a little bit of a lower grade, I would have flunked out.
Oh, okay.
So I barely passed. And the irony was I got the job that all like the valedictorians wanted, which was at a hospital job. And I was there for 3 years. And then so 3 years after working, I was just like, I wanna change.
Okay, so you're what, like 20, what at the time? 3 years in pharmacy, you're late 20s?
Yeah, so I graduated pharmacy school at 24, and
Okay.
then at 27 was when I quit.
You're
Yeah.
like,
I
and were
was
you
working.
married by then?
Yeah, I got married right out of college. Yeah.
Okay. So you're like kind of, and you grew up very religious,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Very involved.
Your family was, your whole family was?
My mom
Okay.
and I were, because of my mom, she brought me to church. And then I got very involved growing up, became part of leadership, worship leader for Sunday school, EM. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
English ministry. Yeah.
Okay. So this is really interesting because there's all these like narratives kind of playing out there, right? Like you're supposed to do this. This is in New York.
Yes.
And then you go into pharmacy. Your mom didn't even tell you to do that, but you did it
Yeah.
because you were telling yourself that I need money,
Yes.
right? And then did you decide I don't need money by the time you were 27? Like, how did all that change?
I think the pain just became so great.
Uh-huh.
It's like one of those realizations. It's like, you have a guaranteed 6 figure salary right out of college as a pharmacist. Now the money's there. I have the nice like sports car I always wanted, the beautiful new apartment in Queens, like brand new. And your anxiety is still there, your stress is still there. And I think just the pain just became so great. After 3 years, I'm like, I don't know what it is, but I want to figure this out. Oh, and there was an opportunity because I was getting into filmmaking
Hmm.
towards that point.
So, what did your wife say at that point when you wanted to drop out of pharmacy and
Yeah,
stop that?
she is so like chill
Uh
with
huh.
that kind of stuff. Like I literally one night, because the opportunity came to work with a group of filmmakers in California, and I was just like, what do you think about me quitting my job? And we spend 2 months on the road, just on our cross country road trip, see the country, and then move to LA to try this filmmaking thing out. She just said, okay. And then we did it. Yeah, we moved into our parents' house for a little bit to try to get all our stuff together because we cut our lease, and then we moved out that summer.
So, when you look back on that, right? Like you're going down some pretty set paths,
Yeah,
like religious beliefs, family commitment. Now you're married.
yeah.
You had this job. So I see like these three tracks and they're pretty set. And people don't veer off those tracks typically,
Yes.
right? The pain was so great. Tell me about what that was. Like what was so bad?
Coming from, I think it had a lot to do with like the brokenness of family,
Hmm.
right? So my dad left our family when I was a teenager. So there's like a lot of anger,
Hmm.
resentment, and oh yeah, there was a lot of money problems. So my father wasn't the best with managing finances. So like to give you an idea, like I found out later on that he gambled my college savings they had for me when I was a little kid, right?
Oh,
And lost it all. And he was a serial entrepreneur that wasn't succeeding.
okay. I love that.
You
Okay.
see what I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah. Yeah.
So he ruins his credit because he's
Uh-huh.
taking out loans and credit cards all the time. So his credit score is gone.
Right.
And then when that happens, he used my mom's name to open up all these accounts. And now my mom's credit got ruined.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm the little kid. I remember getting, I don't know if you ever got a phone call from a debt collector. They're very aggressive and very mean. And imagine a little kid picking up a phone, like saying my dad's name or my mom's name and yelling at me to like figure out a way to get them money. So then that's when I was just like, oh, this must be the problem in our house. We need to make more money. That's why mom and dad's never home. That's why I don't have the connection with them that I want. So I think it stemmed a lot from childhood.
So there's like weird money. Money's a weird thing because it's like it is such a powerful force, right? Like so much of our lives are shaped by it and our thinking. I told you this the other day. Like I remember, like when I was doing all this like self work and meditation and stuff. Like I remembered, I think it was like second or third grade. We had a field trip or like just a special day at school. And that Friday, it's crazy that I remember it was a Friday. Of course it was a Friday because it was like the end of the week, right? And we were all going to order hoagies, like sandwiches, like subs from the local like pizza shop. And it was $5. And I never asked my parents.
Yeah.
I didn't even bring it up because I was like, we just don't have money. I thought that as a third grader. So I didn't ask them for $5 for a sandwich. And so then I didn't eat that day.
Right.
And just sort of like, oh, these are crazy narratives. And it's like running concurrent with all the other things that you're doing. I don't remember a debt collector ever calling me or my family. They probably did. But I do remember after I turned 18, I got some notices in the mail and I found out that my dad had used my social security number and name to apply for a credit card. And I was like, I never applied for this credit card.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's super loaded with tons of stuff, right? Like emotion around it. Like he was not a serial entrepreneur. He was just serially unsuccessul. Sorry, Dad, if you're watching this, I'm just, telling the truth, right? Never really held a job. Like he did, but he could never make ends meet. And now we're on much better terms. And he's actually said to me now, which is weird because I don't really feel that I need it. He's sort of like, I'm sorry I didn't make more money when I was a kid, when you were a kid.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I think I would have been okay with less money if you just weren't like a raging,
right,
like emotional wreck and drunk and, causing all sorts of other harm, right? It was actually that, not the money.
Yeah.
And it's weird that we think that money is going to like solve everything. That's what you thought. You realize the pain is too great, but there's no money in filmmaking. So so explain that. Were you just like, oh, fine, I don't need any more
I got
money?
so jaded because it's like, okay, I have the thing that I thought I wanted.
Yeah.
I have my salary. But I was also overworking. I was working three jobs, right? Still as a graduate because I was so money hungry. And then you get burnt out and you're like, you know what? I'll just give this thing a try. Like this find your passion thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
I was getting into filmmaking. These three guys. The reason I said yes to them was because they were three Asian dudes that left behind more prestigious careers.
Oh, so they left more money.
One guy was a director at the White House under Obama. The second guy was a Wharton grad, went to worked at Bain and quit that, right? It's like a really big consulting firm. And then the third guy was a Harvard med student. So I'm like, they all left behind this to make videos on YouTube. I'm like, it gave me the courage to be like, hey, if you guys are doing it, like, okay, I'll try it out. So it helped to have that community, if that makes sense, to make the leap.
Yeah. Well, no, it does. I think, did you guys talk through like what you envisioned seeing for like, was it a filmmaking company? What, or you guys were just doing project by project?
So at the time, the channel was called Jubilee Project. And by then they were already gaining traction because one of the videos they made went viral. Mm-hmm. So then they were trying to go like, hey, let's try to figure out what it looks like to make this full time. I was talking to one of them and he liked my work. They ran this like workshop, like it's basically like a filmmaking boot camp. And they were like, if you want in, like you're in, like with like telling me like you can apply, but it's just a formality.
Yeah.
So I did that and that's how I got to know them a little bit. Then that's when the invite came like, hey, we'd love to have you on the team if you want to come.
So you're like in your late 20s. What did you think was going to happen with that? Did you have a picture in your mind? Like, this is how it's going to go. We're actually starting ahead of the curve. They've had some videos do really well. did you see yourself doing that like for the rest of your life or like the next
Yeah.
10 years?
Yeah, that was the idea, because at the time, filmmaking became much more affordable. It was like a timing thing too. There was these photography cameras called DSLRs
Mm-hmm.
that became capable of taking video, and that's what changed the game. So there was the wave of that excitement of like, oh, like maybe I can make this a thing. But yeah, like I was kind of dreaming. I think it was like a swirl of stuff, right? It's just like, oh, maybe I'll become a famous, filmmaker or that kind of stuff. Looking back on it as at that age,
Do you think that would have made you happy?
no. Oh my gosh, because like it's like one of those things you see your friends around you. So like Jubilee Project's at like 7.5 million subscribers now, and like all that kind of stuff. Which I love. I still love the guys, right? Like, but like the more and more people you meet, and they're starting to get more influence and fame. And I was that guy, like at the restaurant hanging out with my friend, and like there's a line forming in front of my friend.
Okay.
And I was just like, either you have to be so insecure that it feeds you, like all this attention feeds your insecurity, right? Or it's miserable. It's like you can't
There's
go
no in between.
There's no in between. So then that's kind of when I was just like, I don't think I would have been happy. Like I think it would have fed my insecurity at the time. But then I think it would have ruined me, honestly, like in like a mental health crisis way.
That's interesting. I've never heard it said that way. So you don't think that like very famous people, like there's no just like in between. They're either, no, I'm not saying there's no in between, but it's likely that they're wired a certain way to like feed that narcissism or that
Right.
insecurity, or they're just like, I don't like this, which is why you see a lot of celebrities fight for privacy. They have to pay so much of the money
they're
make
very
for
private.
Privacy.
Right.
Right. But that's happening on like this micro level now because of social media. We all have these micro famous people, micro influencers, you name it. When you look at like the world today through that lens, and I'll get into some of like a lot of the neuro stuff that you do, like do you just see society like, wow, we are like not capable of handling this at all? Like we're just everyone on Instagram or TikTok, like we are just screwed.
I think I'm on the opposite end in terms of no, we are capable. I do think the environment has become much more difficult for people to learn. Like, for example, like, a lot of my clients are running teams and they're complaining about Gen Z, right? Because they experience these things. I'll give you one example. One client was like, I was doing this event, really important event. I need to hire 2 people. These 2 Gen Z, right? People signed up and he was paying good money and everything. The day of the event, both of them, no show, nothing, ghosted, won't respond, not even a heads up, hey, I can't make it. So I'm examining stuff like that and people are complaining about. But when you study it, it's because they haven't been equipped to handle uncomfortable
conversations,
feelings.
Feelings.
The mindset behind it is, I would much rather not experience the disappointment or anger in your face. I will ghost you. It's the same thing with cancel culture. I would rather not have this difficult conversation to try to have a connection and try to figure something out together. I will just cancel you, right? So the reason for that, though, if there's always a reason for the behavior. If their daily environment, anyone can whip out a phone if you do something stupid at school. It can go on the internet. You're not experiencing the shame of just the room. You're experiencing the shame of like the internet. And it was interesting, right? Because but we don't equip. I don't think current modalities equip the younger generations to handle that level of emotional difficulty. So, but it doesn't mean that they can't learn it. So I do feel like we're all capable. I think we just have our work cut out for us to be able to equip our future generations.
That sounds like a lot of work cut out for us, because if you think about how we behave on a phone, we don't like something, just delete it or block it or turn it off or switch the channel, go to something else instantly. I don't know, when we were growing up, like I didn't have cable TV. If I didn't like a show, I just left it on because there's like no other option.
Yeah.
Or just go outside or do whatever. Okay, I never thought about that way. That's very interesting. Do you see like adults who like my age or older or whatnot are more equipped for it, or are we just as ill-equipped for a handle? Because now we're all on these phones and we're all on social media and we're all seeing this, and it's easy for us to complain about Gen Z, which is funny because 10 years ago everyone was complaining about millennials,
Right.
and now they've got kids, right? And all that. So like, do you see the approach to kind of working through all that and equipping ourselves differently for like those generations?
Yes. Like the way I see it is we have what each other needs. You see what I'm saying? It's like kind of like that classic of like, if a Gen Z is in a bind and their GPS isn't working, the older Gen X could be like, why do you need that? I already know all the streets. Like I'm trying to come up with a good example, but something like that. But every generation has their trauma. Like millennials, I'm a tail end on the older side of the millennial. It was interesting because I went from not having a cell phone to having a cell phone, and then watching how it became rude to call people. But I used to call people all the time, my friends, on the phone. But now it's just like, it's rude to call me because you could have texted me and I get to respond on my own time if you text. How dare you call me? Right? It literally became a cultural thing. And I felt that too at times when people are calling. I'm like, I don't want to pick up. Do you see every generation has their like quirks, and it's interesting. But then at the end of the day, we all can, that's kind of why I like the science, like we can all equip ourselves to be able to handle the different scenarios.
I sent my first email freshman year of college. That's crazy. Like I had to go to the computer lab at Rutgers. That's where I went to school. And I remember the first person I ever emailed was my friend Michelle from church. And she was a year older than me. And she went to school in Boston. And I just emailed her. And I was like, this is amazing. Yeah. This is so crazy. And it was like a black and green screen. That's how old I'm dating myself here. Right. And our computer lab, you had to wait online to get into the computer lab.
That's right.
They had like 30 computers, 50 computers, whatever it was. And you literally couldn't type your own paper if you didn't have a computer. You had to use a computer lab. And that's when AIM came out, like American Online Instant Messenger. And people just like, they'd be on there for hours, just basically texting.
Text messaging, yeah.
DMing each other, which is hilarious for me now to see this come back into all these apps. I'm like, this is just AIM.
Yeah. Back
again. Sitting on top of another platform like Instagram or Facebook, all the DMs. I think my generation's trauma, I think I'm technically a Gen X.
Yeah.
Right. I don't know what our generation's trauma is. I would joke with my friends, like, I'm like, we're just glue. We're nothing. We'll be forgotten forever. We're just the people who grew up in the 80s and watched 80s cartoons and movies. And then we were too old to adopt TikTok. And we're just going to be the bridge that is just burned down and forgotten, right? Like, I'm like, we never got any special Gen X. I mean, what did we do? The technology wasn't as advanced for us. Yeah, we had Napster in college and like downloaded tons of music illegally.
Yeah.
And that was it. I mean, we didn't, by the time I was in my 20s, like that's when the iPod came out, and Blackberries came out much later, like when I was in my 30s, which is kind of wild, right? When you see people and you work with people from all different walks of life, older than us, my age, younger than you, all different walks of life. One of the things I'm always fascinated by is how people rewrite these narratives in their head, these stories that they're told. Or the stories that they tell themselves. You've done that a lot. You wrote, I'm going to be a pharmacist. I'm going to make money. I am going to get married. That's a whole nother thing, right? Maybe I want stability. I got married really young. You got married really young. I'm going to, now get really involved in my church. What did young Eugene think perfect Eugene was supposed to look like?
Like just immediately reflecting on it, like the image of a pedestal came to mind. Like maybe I will finally be worthy one day. So I was big on like, I'm going to become a leader. I'm going to be the worship leader. I'm going to become somebody. I'll be that pharmacist. I'll be that famous filmmaker. And that narrative ran for a long time, honestly, and still kicks in sometimes. You know what I mean? Like you feel that like comparison or the jealousy or whatever at times.
Why do you think it was a pedestal? Like that's a really interesting term. Like you wanted like recognition, validate. Is that what that meant to
Yeah,
you?
like I think that's what that meant. It's like to be seen, right? To be acknowledged as somebody, right? Like somebody cool, right? Because there was that narrative too growing up. I didn't fit in. Like I was a pretty weird, quirky kid as a child, right? And chubby.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, very chubby actually. Yeah.
I think I think feeling seen is an interesting way of putting it. I actually, when I was young, hated being seen,
Hmm.
but I was really tall. I was always really tall, and I hated being tall.
Oh, like you stuck out physically
Yeah,
as well. Yeah.
stuck out physically. I actually remember this probably when I was like 8 years old or something. We were being tested on what we could sing in like music class, like scales. So I go up to the teacher, he plays on the piano, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. And I screwed up the notes on purpose. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, da. And I just did something like that because I didn't want him to put me in the choir or in the singing ensemble because I
Oh.
didn't want the attention. And I also thought, I just thought singing was really
Yeah.
lame, not masculine and not tough. Like my dad was a second or third degree black belt in taekwondo, and he
Mm.
was, he was a physical guy. Like he would kick me and stuff.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, like for fun, like joking around. He's like,
Wow.
"Hey, how are you doing?" Bah, not hard, but he'd like, fake punching or what. But I would like physically be scared, right? Um, so I actually remember not wanting to be put on a stage. And then I always
Mm.
thought like singing was really like girly.
Mm.
I didn't think that it was like a masculine thing to do. Um, and it's weird that still follows me till this day.
Mm.
It's very odd
Yeah.
that I actually went into music and I was way more talented in art, music, and writing than I was with anything else. I was pretty good at sports. I was, played really well on my basketball high school team. I felt like certain sports I picked up really well. People say like, dude, you could play golf really well if you really put your mind to it.
Mm.
And yet I don't think that like I'm a strong and tough individual. And all of that's just a narrative, right? And no
Yeah.
matter how much I do Muay Thai and work out, like I still feel like a very weak person,
Mm.
which is crazy to think like this follows you from I don't even know where it comes from, like when you're a little kid,
Yeah.
and how much those stories like just run like an undercurrent in our mind. Knowing what you've studied, do you have any kind of explanation for that? Is it just a pattern that's running in all our minds that's just ingrained in us since we're kids?
Yeah. I mean, when we're hurting,
Hmm.
we react in only one of three ways, right? Like it's literally your brain's like reactive. You're reacting. You're doing it without thinking. It's the same mode that you're in if a tiger's in front of you about to eat you. Because if you start thinking, you die. So when we're hurting, we immediately react in one of three ways. We either fight. So that's the accomplishment part. That's what I did for so much of my life. That's why I got burnt out, because fight always leads to burnout. Oh, I need to accomplish more. I need to make more money. I need to get, X amount of followers or X, whatever the accomplishment you think will make you happy is. We fight so much towards that reactively. So, being in the Asian kind of background, we see a lot of that. People who place value on status, especially like Asian parents. So they make you work hard for it. Um, or we go into flight mode, which is we procrastinate, but a lot of us tend to numb ourselves in some way, where it's to the point of like addictive behavior, right? Binge watch Netflix, alcohol, sex, drugs, to the point of addiction. It's to numb the pain. And there's no judgment on any of this. It's just awareness building. And then sometimes we freeze. That's when we're getting up in the morning. We don't want to get out of bed. Um, that's what made sense to me all of a sudden. After all these years having my doctorate, the healthcare, the neuroscience, I'm just like, oh, we're all just hurting. Because the research shows that we're in that fight, flight, freeze mode for about 70% of our adult lives. Not because of actual physical danger, but because our brain tries to survive from uncomfortable emotions. Because research shows that emotional pain can be just as painful as physical pain. So that's why we keep reacting to it. So you have to think about how often are we stressed every day? How often are we anxious? How often are we depressed? How often are we angry, frustrated? And then we're going into that mode. And that's what I realized. I was just like, oh, we're just hurting. But if we can get better at managing our pain instead of running away from it, yes, it means it's going to be uncomfortable, but that's true strength. That's true courage, to be able to have a moment where you're feeling a feeling, no matter how uncomfortable, and you listen instead of reacting. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, you don't react. You're
Yeah.
like, okay, here's anxiety. Oh gosh, I'm in for a ride. I think if we can all learn to do that, the suicide rates would go down instead of going up. That's what's happening in the younger generations, because they're so uncomfortable. If a partner breaks up with you, they're going to kill themselves. How does that make sense? It's because we got so hypersensitized. We got so fearful of these emotions that are actually, at the end of the day, they're there to help, not to hurt. Yeah, that's kind of what I realized looking into like the science behind all of this.
I remember I didn't really get a grasp on that until probably about 5 years ago, right? So my ex-wife and I got divorced. That was definitely the most painful thing I've ever felt. Like, I would say more than whatever I felt as a kid.
Yeah.
Maybe because I don't remember what I felt as a kid and cannot process it. But now I'm a grown man and feeling these things. And like, I think anyone who's gone through that understands what I'm saying, but it's hard to describe. It's like inside, it's like a pit. And it's so emotionally like painful that your body reacts.
Yes.
And that's why you cry. And I would joke, like, the last time I cried was in 9th grade when Arnold Schwarzenegger dies in Terminator 2, you know, and it's like, right. And then like, I was like, man, I was crying all the time. It was so painful. And then coming out of that, kind of moving through that, and it's a journey in itself. But then now I'm on the other side. We're good, right? We're cordial. Like, it ended on a good note, which is all good, right? And yet I'm alone. And I was numbing a lot, going out, drinking, all, you know, the partying, the sex, all that sort of stuff. And it's, you know, just diverting attention, overworking. I did all of it, fight, freeze, you name it, right? I'll just like a super combo all in one, right?
Yeah.
And I remember like once I finally got my own place to live, because I stayed with family like for a little while, and then I traveled a lot. So I used them as home base. And so I moved back to New Jersey, and dude, I remember like sometimes there were these like Friday nights and Saturday nights, especially, when I would just stay in because I just made no plans. I was like, I don't want to go out, but I don't want to stay in, but I'm not going to go out. I have nothing to do. I don't want to drink again. I don't want to, you know, go on another, you know, first date with some random person when I know that I cannot commit to anything right now. Yeah. And I would stay home. And I would just sit there and journal or whatever and have nothing to do. And it would be so painful. And it would, maybe I'd last like 20 minutes, 30 minutes. And then I'm like, all right, I'm going to do an edible. I can't take this anymore.
Yeah.
But it was like that 30 minutes, like the universe like multiplied it. It was like, oh, extra credit because it was a Friday night, extra credit because it was Saturday night. Because that's when I typically would just go out.
Yeah.
And I really think that accelerated so much of the healing.
Yes.
And it's just like, here's the night. I usually have done 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but I'm going to do this and sit with it. And it would be really painful for a while. And then now I know how to kind of navigate that a lot better.
Yeah.
But I can see why people don't want to sit with it.
100%.
I just don't. I mean, I had to do a lot of counseling and a lot of psychedelic retreats and a lot of meditation and a lot of journaling to like be able to kind of handle that for myself. What was that experience like for you? Like, when did you start to discover I'm the only one who can actually do this work for myself?
Yeah. Well, first off, what you just mentioned, even if it was just 20, 30 minutes, I want to highlight that. Most people don't realize that is the most courageous thing you can do. Like, if you want to talk about courage, that's courage. To be able to sit with the current moment, and no matter how uncomfortable it gets, you do not react. You do not go to the bar. You do not take the edible. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You do not go, hook up or whatever it is. That's courage, because I kind of realized, one of the stories I share too, it's like, I think a lot of us have this, right? Where when you're with friends or loved ones, for me, it was my kids, but I'm not with them. My mind is not with them. Like, I'm thinking about work or problems. And once I became a parent, the time flying thing was really getting to me. I'm like, when did you get so big? Like you were this tiny, just like it felt like it was yesterday. And I was getting so emotional about that. And I realized, wait, one of the reasons why time goes by so fast, in addition to the reason that it's because our brains develop a lot more autopilot, like habits, right, every day, the routines, is my mind is always on the future so much or running away from the past so much. It means I'm not here right now. But those are the best moments when you're with your child and it's timeless. When you're having fun with your friends and it's timeless. You would rather be nowhere else except here right now. Why can't I do more of that? It's because in order to have that special moment, it requires me to be here right now, but I don't like what's here right now. Like my stress, like my anxiety, my depression, my anger, my frustration. I think if we can get really good at that, that's what changed the game. So what happened for me was one of the stories I share was this leader and like a brief mentor of mine would ask this question. He's like, would you go out with yourself?
So good.
Because somebody came up to that person and was like, I want to find the dream partner, right? How do I find the perfect partner for me? As if there's such a thing as somebody outside of yourself that you can hold responsible for your happiness. It's an insecurity question. How do I find someone so that I don't have to take ownership over my unhappiness? And when I'm unhappy, at least I have someone to blame. It's like, oh, you're the reason it's because you did. That's why they're asking that. It's an insurance policy, right? Finding the perfect partner, because there's no such thing as one, right? I remember sitting there going, I immediately noticed my reactive answer was no, I wouldn't go out with myself because it's easy to see all the things you don't like about yourself. And that's pretty cliche in the personal development world, like self-love, self. But you know what really hit me? I sat there, I'm like, oh my gosh. I can tell my wife and my kids that I really love them and I'm doing all these amazing, nice things for them because I love them. But if I don't love me, I'm not doing it for them. I'm actually doing it for myself. Why? Because the narrative I had for so much of my life was I don't matter. So how do I fight in fight mode? My brain's going, how can you matter? Maybe you can fight and do nice things for other people. And I've realized that's why I served so much in the church too. It's like, if you keep serving, maybe you will matter.
Yeah.
If you keep fighting hard to matter, maybe you will matter one day. So then I'm not doing these nice things for my family because I love them. I'm doing it because I don't matter and I want to matter. So that means I'm being selfish. So that was a big aha for me. So then what do I need to do? I actually need to have a better relationship with myself first, because otherwise I will keep using them. This was such a big aha for me because like growing up in church culture, it's very common, right? Like be humble and serve. So the answer is always serve more. Like that's a tendency, right? Even though you're burnt out and you're having so much trouble at home and parents are divorcing and all that,
so
right?
toxic.
Just so toxic. Go serve more. But now I realize BS. If you know anyone that overgives, no matter how much they say they're doing it because they care and they're doing it for other people, no, it's because you're operating out of the fight mode and insecurity and you don't love yourself. You actually have a narrative that your worth is less than it actually is. So that was the big aha for me. And that's when I started investing in myself, because I realized, how can I become a better server, a better husband, a better father, unless I keep growing, right? It's not about what I do, but it's about how much my internal self grows and how much of a better relationship I have with myself. And all of the writing on the wall came out during that time. Like another one was like, have you ever experienced this, whether it's as a child or other kids, where if they're having a tantrum, melting down, usually the caretaker tries to distract them in some way?
Yeah.
Like, oh, here's some candy.
Like laugh at
yeah.
them.
Or like,
oh, that's so funny.
Let's turn on the TV. And I was doing that because it's just learned behavior from growing up. And I'm sitting there going, wait, hold on. Because I study all the neuroscience and stuff now. For the child, it's confusing because the child's going, wait, I'm really upset. And you're behaving in this way. It makes me, the narrative that they're creating, right? These feelings must be really bad because you seem very anxious about my feelings. Oh, so I shouldn't feel these feelings.
I see.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like that's the narrative that gets created in the child. So I'm realizing that, going, well, why do I do that? Oh, I have a lot of trouble sitting with my feelings. So the moment you're feeling distress, I don't like that. So I react, I fight. How do I make you stop feeling this? Because I'm very bad at feeling these feelings because I'm always reactive to these feelings. And therefore all of the empathy's gone, the connection's not happening, it's a transactional, all that kind of stuff. So that's when I really started taking it a lot more seriously and going down the rabbit hole of all of this.
It's so nuanced because I think all of us who see a parent who is clearly vicariously living through their child and it's just like really hard on them, we're like, that's screwed up, like that's completely toxic, that's messed up. But it's so much more subtle, like you're saying, in everyday life. It's the same thing, it's the same sensation, it's just more subtle. Like, oh, I'm not like trying to make my kid the baseball player I always wish I was, but you're still projecting your own emotional need onto every situation. I think what you said about the church stuff is very interesting. And for me, that ties into being present, because growing up and being really involved in church and really believing everything, and really being so involved in it, I realize now, looking back, I never was happy in the present moment, because doctrinally, like theologically, you're always living for some other day in the future. One day will be perfect. And my church culture was very charismatic. So these are all the tongue speaking, flags waving, like literally people brought swords to worship events. I was like, what the
wow.
Like they're cutting the devil in the spirit. And I'm like, it's funny. This is the last conference I ever led worship at was at my friend Josh's church in upstate New York. And this was like my last hurrah. This was like in 2012 or whatever. And I knew it. This is the last conference I'm ever going to do. Like nobody else really knew it, but I knew it. I was like, this is the last time I'm going to do this because it's my friend. And he had this event. Right? So they do the whole, like, it was a big production, like countdown, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And we're supposed to, and we had this like kicking song ready. And they turn on the lights and I go, just, you know, my person, I'm just very deadpan. I just go, they turn on the lights. I'm behind the mic. I'm like, hey, so just really glad that everyone's here. If you have a sword, you might want to go to the back of the room because we just don't want anyone to get hurt. Like when I tell that story now, I'm like, that is batshit crazy. People came to our church event with swords.
Yeah.
So that they could like do war in the spirit. And I'm like, go to the back. At least no one will be behind you and you won't murder someone by accident, right? And I was like, this is so odd. And like in that culture, it's always like, God's going to do something. Revival is going to come. Come down. Heaven come down. God come down, right? It's like, because our present moment doesn't matter. Where we are and who we are does not matter. And then you heap on top of that like a lot of shame and like, you know, you're not shame perfect and like, you know, God needs to renew me, and if I'm not holy enough, he's not going to do something, as if it is a transactional. It's very transactional.
100%.
And so I never liked myself in the moment. Like I never was, looking back, I was just never content. Even if a service went great, if something wonderful happened, there can always be more. There can always be more. So just intellectually looking at that, you can see how that screws with us so much in terms of not allowing us to be present. It's like probably like you with your kids and be like, I just see them at the college graduation when they're like 21. They're like, no, they're 9 right now. Yeah. Like just enjoy the moment.
Right.
I think some of the shame stuff that you mentioned too is huge. And one of the things I'm really glad about social media, and I'm thankful for social media in this respect, is I think it has normalized a lot of things that used to be taboo to talk about.
Yes.
That's one benefit of social media that I've seen. I think it's just given a voice to the masses.
I agree.
And then we realize the masses are not so smart. We're not maybe so smart, but then neither are the people who are in charge, because they're just one of us. They're just controlling things. For people to talk so openly about porn addiction or prostitution or drugs or affairs or any of that, you couldn't talk about any of that, especially in the culture that we grew up in, either religious or Asian and Korean.
Yeah.
Years ago, he's a very well-known pastor here in the States, and he got fired from this huge church that he built. I won't say his name. And I was like, oh, okay, well, another one probably had an affair. Affairs happen all the time. I'm not minimizing.
Yeah.
Look, I went through, right? So it's like, I understand that kind of feeling, betrayal and all that stuff. But like, he got fired because he drank. I'm like, he drank? He had a beer? Like,
Wow.
that's it? And then there's this other article that came out a couple months ago on Fox News, which I don't read a lot, but I just stumbled around it. And the headline was something like, and by the way, side note, Fox News has the best, worst headlines ever. I mean, from a marketing guy, like my background in marketing, I'm like, the copywriting, I'm like, these are the most clickbaity headlines ever. And they are clearly designed to instill fear in people. It's just brilliance.
Yeah.
If I was on that team, right? That is, I was America's pastor, but here's what no one knew. And I'm like, oh, cool, juicy headline. I click on it. It's like Max Lucado, famous Christian author. The first book I read of his was called The Grip of Grace. It was a great book, right? He's telling this story. He's like, my church was growing, and like we were in San Antonio, and we were featured in all the national media, and people were coming from all over the world to visit us. And yet no one knew that all of my staff were infighting for budget dollars. And like, I was just burned out. I was teaching 3-4 times a week. And you see, there I was in the parking lot. And I'm like, oh, what is it? I grabbed a big can of beer and was just chugging it in my car in the parking lot. I'm like, that's it?
Yeah.
It's like, oh my, I feel kind of really bad for him. Not that I'm condoning people to drink.
Right.
But it's like, he had so little margin to just like, how do you handle that amount of stress without cracking? I'm like, I'm glad it wasn't worse.
Yeah.
I'm glad you didn't off yourself.
Right.
Like, so when you see this, you understand what I'm saying about this whole shame culture. Yeah. And then at the same time, social media is at least like opening the bandage a little bit and letting some air get in, and people can talk more openly about it. And on the flip side, there are people like, this is just who I am. Too bad, take it or leave it. They don't want to change. Where do we go from here? Like, how do you see this moving forward? That's why I love your work. I love like a lot of the other folks who are online, like, Huberman and even, Rogan, and he's talking about like these really tough issues and normalizing the conversation. But I think there's a temptation to think just because I talk about it, then I'm fine. Right. That's progress, right? Like just because I join a gym, I'm getting in shape, but you don't really do the work. You don't push. Where do you see that kind of going, and how can we grow? What do we need to know to take those steps?
Yeah. I think one thing is in terms of just being more aware of why all of this occurs, right? So we're so afraid, we're literally surviving from emotions that we don't feel comfortable with. So then we go off into that, brainless, mindless, fight, flight, freeze response. So it's interesting you brought up Max Lucado, because it reminded me of Hillsongs, is this other mega church. Yeah. One of these really charismatic pastors in New York City, Carl Lentz, he got kicked out of the church because he was cheating on his wife, and it got exposed. The woman that he was having an affair with came out, and they dropped him like a fly. And not only did they fire him, they fired the wife who was working at the church, and she was nothing to do with this. Right. And they fire her. And the behavior is like, there's optics behind it. And then there was also the person who was doing the firing had his own skeletons in the closet, because it turned out his dad was molesting children and stuff like that. And it finally came out and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, one of the things I found helpful is when we get really good at being aware of the pain behind the behavior. If you can see the pain behind the behavior, then we don't get as judgmental. Then we actually start feeling empathy. Then we start feeling compassion. So like one thing that helped me a lot, because I dealt with a lot of anger and resentment and other people who are really rude when they're angry and resentful too. The science behind that is anger is a secondary emotion. And what's behind the anger is always fear. If you go to a mama lion with its cubs, it's going to use anger to get you to back off because it's feeling vulnerable. Yeah. And it's the same thing that we're doing when we get angry. And it's so interesting because the narratives we started to create, when we're afraid, your brain needs black and white thinking. If a tiger's in front of you about to eat you, you don't want to go to gray area and start sitting and reflecting. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. But it's only in life-threatening scenarios you need black and white thinking. But that's what's causing all of the pain in the world, is we've created a world where it's getting more polarized. I'm not that political, but it's getting further left, further right, all that kind of stuff, right? Vaccine, no vaccine, pro-choice, pro-life. And it's two parties that are in such black and white thinking. There's no empathy. They just want to fight the other party and win. No one's willing to meet in the middle in this gray area. So what I realize is true strength, and I've watched relationships get saved. I've watched businesses get saved. I've watched like people in pretty high places, once they learn how to do this, like it makes a huge impact, is simply the skill. Like true strength and resilience is that ability to just be with the feeling first. That's the first step, right? One way I describe it is like, you ever see those fake scare scenes in the horror movies? Like the bushes are rustling, the music's getting intense, out pops the cute bunny. I guarantee you, if you can do the same, like eventually if you just train yourself, I'm just going to keep watching. It's not that bad anymore over time. Oh, there's the bunny, there's the cute thing. It's the same with our uncomfortable emotions. If we get good at like the music's getting intense in our minds, the bushes are rustling and you're feeling scared, and don't react, don't grab that drink, don't do this, don't, whatever your usual reaction or numbing mechanism is, out pops like the 5-year-old you, the 10-year-old you that created a narrative in that moment that I don't matter, I suck. And then you can actually develop a relationship with that kid. So the better we get at doing that, then you can see the second step is you can see the narrative you created. Oh my gosh, that's the moment I started believing money's hard to make. That's the moment I started believing that I don't matter. And then just like you would take care of someone you love outside of you, you start taking care of yourself, going, hey, buddy, that's not true. I know you've been stuck in time when you're 10 years old. I have a lot of things to share with you. And you know what? Oh my God, I'm so sorry. All this time, I wouldn't share this stuff with you, huh? I always viewed you as the problem. I kept reacting to you, telling you I was too busy, I had work. Or telling you, no, I'd rather watch Netflix or a drink or whatever.
Not be with you.
Not be with you.
Like ignore you.
Ignoring you so much. And you know what the most humbling part is? That younger version of you, call it what you want, right? Like I have my own labels for it all, but that kid is infinite love. Meaning like you step into the room, that kid's just so happy to see you and just so happy to be with you. And you just start getting filled with so much gratitude. And there's so much that kid doesn't know that if only you told them. It's like, oh yeah, this thing of you not mattering, that has nothing to do with you. Mom and dad had their own survival issues too. They were just trying to get by. They were doing the best they can. It didn't mean you didn't matter.
Yeah. And even if you had like the best parents in the world,
right,
like we'd all have something to work through.
Exactly.
It's kind of interesting. Like now we're at this point where like a lot of the athletes I grew up watching are retired.
Yeah.
And they're doing podcasts. And a side note, I actually think that podcasts, these kinds of shows, are actually helpful. I think they are actually bringing people together, because you see these hosts who are not hardlining one or the other, and you realize there are a lot more people than we thought that actually might be willing to meet in the middle. It's just media doesn't work that way.
Correct.
Mainstream media, news outlets don't work. Political parties don't work that way.
And it doesn't generate views as much.
It doesn't generate views, right? Who wants to be challenged to think more critically when they're already burned out going to work and dealing with family and all that stuff? They just black and white, right? And I've been watching a couple of interviews like Peyton Manning, Tom Brady, you know, two of the greatest quarterbacks. And I met Peyton Manning at Pebble Beach golf course, you know, years and years ago. And just nice dude, nice guy. I couldn't take a picture with him because they had beers on the table, so it was against team policy. Oh. So we didn't take a picture. It was a funny story because I went there with my ex-wife and her parents, and we went out for a golf trip. And we're sitting at this, we're sitting at the restaurant, like downstairs in the clubhouse. They would all go up to shower. I get the reservation, and there's like a big table, maybe 12, 15 guys sitting like, you know, 5 feet behind me, and they're freaking loud. They're all wearing blazers. They're super loud. I'm just like, who are these? These guys are so loud. It's like a nice place. This is a Pebble Beach, you know? And then I look back and they go, yo, I tell my wife, because she loves Peyton Manning. That's Peyton Manning. She's like, oh my God, we got to go over there right now. I was like, no, this famous people come here. And this is interesting how I responded. We're not going to be those Asian tourists who go over there and bother these famous people. and asked them for a photo. And her parents like, what's going on? And her dad's like, what? Who's? And she's like, oh, these are famous. You know, they don't know football. They're Korean. They don't know the NFL. They don't know the sport at all, right? So she goes to me. Basically, she's like, if you don't take me over there, like, I'm just gonna go over there. And she's basically like, can you man up and take me over there, right? So I was like, okay, I will take you over there. So I go over. I'm like, hey, Mr. Manning, sorry to intrude. My wife's a big fan of yours. She was wondering if, you know, she could get a picture. He's like, oh, how? And he's so nice. Shake his hand. Dude, his hand was like the size of a frying pan and that hard. I'm like, oh, this is the hand. I was like, it was kind of creepy. I was like, this is the hand that's thrown 400 touchdowns or something, right? And he's like, where are you guys from? And we're like, oh, from New Jersey. And of course, Eli, his brother.
Oh, Eli was there too.
Eli was not there, but Eli was the quarterback of the Giants who play in New Jersey. So she's like, oh, we're from New Jersey. He goes, you guys Giants fans? Because of Eli, right? And she goes, he points to me. He's an Eagles fan. Just throws me under the bus because I hate the Giants, right? And they're all laughing. She just threw me in front of the bus, like in front of this NFL quarterback. It was just a funny exchange. And I remember like later that night, I was like, while I was walking down to the restaurant, I walked by a guy, and I'm pretty tall, so I notice when people are bigger. And I was like, that guy looked just like Tom Brady. It was probably Tom Brady. They were all in town for like a pro-am tournament. So all that to say, like, I've been watching these guys, some of their podcasts and their interviews, Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, they speak so highly of their dads. Like their dads are like, oh, like I watched an interview with Brady recently, and he was like, man, I was the youngest of 4 kids. I had 3 sisters. I think that was the scenario. And he was like, I told my dad I wanted to get better at football. And his response was, great, let's sign up for this camp. Let's just see what you can do. Let's get you involved. Like his dad was just like that. And like, it's a weird thing, I think, for both of us and for many people probably watching who don't have that kind of relation. I have no idea what that would feel like.
Right.
I have 0 idea. Like it does not even compute.
Right.
Like my dad would want to leave Yankee games early because he thought the game was over. I was like, I want to stay the extra 2 innings. Let's go. Right. So to fight for that, and I'm not denigrating anybody or situations, but we all have our own challenges. Right. But I think like now, like it's like hearing those stories doesn't make me jealous that I didn't have that. Or doesn't make me resent them. They had a leg up, right? It's just, wow, everyone's got their own stuff.
Yeah.
But it's normalizing that I can be a man who is healthy and whole and encouraging if I have kids, if I have a family. Because Archie Manning Peyton's dad is that age.
Yeah.
And I had this narrative that all men, my father's generation and older, are idiots.
Right.
They don't care. They're just rough and tumble guys. They're, you know, and it's interesting to kind of see how all this content that people are creating is actually normalizing a lot of the stuff.
I love that. You know, it reminds me of so Kobe Bryant, I don't know if you ever saw this interview. Kobe Bryant was talking about how in junior high school, he sucked. Like he joined the league. His father was a professional basketball player. He joined the league that his dad used to play in and was like one of the best at. And he sucked. He couldn't make any shots. So he comes home crying one day, so devastated, saying he can't figure this out. And his dad gets at eye level with him and says, Kobe, I don't care if you score 0 points or 60 points. I love you no matter what. Kobe credits that moment for his success. Wow. He's like, that's the most important thing you need to hear as a kid. Because now it doesn't matter if he fails. He still has the love of his father. And then he was just like, well, screw it. I'm still going to make 60 points per game. And then the rest is history, right? It's interesting because you brought up the thing that you were saying in response to your ex-wife, right? Was like, oh, I don't want to be that awkward Asian guy. Like there's already so many narratives there.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Totally,
right.
100%.
There's already so many narratives like, oh, I'm not them. And you brought up another narrative too. One kind of narrative I talk about a lot behind the scenes is like you use the word bother. Bothering is not real. Bothering is only real to me if I have a narrative about bothering, meaning you come to me and you interrupt me and I'm going, oh, you're bothering me. That's a narrative because it got proven wrong because you're going, what the heck? Why is Peyton Manning like the nicest person in the, he just literally disproved your narrative. Like, you're not bothering me. I don't get bothered. Right. So when you work out all those narratives, the part is like you were just saying, it's just like, sometimes we just need that person to help us work out those narratives. It's very fortunate when it's dad that can do it, someone like a parent figure or caretaker. But one thing I realized, we all have the capability to work out that narratives for ourselves, especially the moment you become aware. I had a client, had a really rough scenario with his father, where dad was having affairs as well, and got kicked out of the house in second grade when he was in second grade. And he became that boy at his baseball games. He's looking at the bleachers, hoping that his dad's there, but he's not there. And anyway, they kind of, start working together in his dad's business. And then I'm having a conversation with him, and he's like, my dad's not getting any younger. And I'm like exploring the narrative, right? I'm like, well, what's concerning you about that? It's like, well, like kind of like the obvious, like he's going to die soon. He's not getting any younger. Like, well, what bothers you about that? And what we found out was the only reason he's afraid of dad dying, it's not he's afraid, it's that little kid in him that's afraid, that wanted a really good dad. Because the moment dad dies, it's set in stone. I don't have the dad I always wanted. Right? That's the narrative. And what was so powerful is he was able to make a decision that day. Wait, hold on. I'm an adult now. I can be that dad for me if I choose to be so. I think that's the part, if we can all just understand that when you're feeling stress, frustration, anxiety, what would the person that you want for yourself do for you, right? If you want to stay at the Yankee game, screw it. Stay at the Yankee game. You're an adult. Tell your friends I'm going to stay and you guys can go. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
like that kind of spirit. That's true strength. That's true resilience, is what I found out. And yeah, like I geek out on all the science behind it, but at the end of the day, that's what keeps me going. It's like, oh my God, we all can do this. It's not rocket science. It does take effort and energy and work. But it's the most rewarding thing ever. You become more whole.
The reparenting thing is a huge thing. And I haven't studied a lot of it, but I know I've been doing it, whether unconsciously or consciously. So recently, several months ago, I went to Korea to visit my dad. I hadn't seen him in 4 years. And before that 4 years that I saw him, I hadn't seen him for like 10 or 12 years. We were estranged. And I go out there, I'm doing okay financially and all the things, right? Like I don't need him to pay for anything, right? And I stay with him in his apartment rather than a hotel, because I'm thinking this would be more meaningful to him for his son to stay with him, even though I'm not that comfortable and he's not that comfortable. He let me sleep in the room. He took the living room. And I was like, it was a weird thing to allow myself to receive it.
Yeah.
And then we went out to eat, because obviously he doesn't cook at home. And it's Korea, so you could just buy food for really cheap, and it's really good. It's better than you would make it, right? Why do it when the store down the street just does a great job? And he paid for like every meal. And I just let him pay for every meal. And I was just like, you just need to receive. I was like acting like I was a kid again, because I don't actually consciously remember him doing anything for me when I was growing up, because I've like broad brushed my whole childhood. My childhood was all bad. He never did anything for me. It was like recently a friend was like, dude, I slept over your house all the time when we were in high school. I was like, I don't remember that. Why would you ever want to sleep over my house? My parents were always fighting. I had no video games. Like I literally don't remember him ever staying over my house. So I know now as an adult, clearly my brain has just broad brushed my entire childhood. Of course, there were times when my dad I didn't pay for those Yankee tickets, right? He did, right? He still wanted to leave the game early. But like, even what I'm saying, I'm realizing I don't remember the whole truth.
Right.
So he's taking me out, like he's paying for all the food. And then I have to go to Japan from Korea. It takes me to the airport like freaking ungodly hour in the morning. And then we realize I don't have the proper vaccination documentation to get into Japan. So I'm helpless. I have no idea what to do. Nothing's in English. It's not easy. He just stays with me for hours to make sure I get we do the third like booster test, or I get a COVID test, right? They want to make sure I don't have it. But didn't open till like 9 o'clock in the morning. And my flight was at like 6 in the morning. So I had to change flights. He's like, go upstairs, change the flight. I'll stay online here. And then we got it done and I still left that day. And I look back on that, I'm like, wow, that was really nice of him to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, there's a part that some other people will be like, why wouldn't your dad do that? But that's how strong that feeling was. Like, I don't think he's ever done anything for me. And so I had to just like receive it. And then I had to admit to myself, like, you'd be hosed if he wasn't here to help you with this situation at the airport. I think reparenting, there did come a time though, where I don't remember when this was, maybe when I took an edible at home alone and just started meditating, because I do that a lot.
Yeah.
It helps me a lot. And I think my dog's like, what are you doing? I like you like this. You're very chill, right? She always snuggles with me when I do that. So it's interesting. But I had this kind of awakening. I was like, I have become the man that I always wished he was for me.
Yeah.
Or I have become the parent for myself that I always wished that I had, especially with him. And again, not putting him down or anything like that. He had his own issues and demons and struggles, and I get it because I now know more of his backstory. I'm like, of course.
Yeah.
You know, when he was my age now, I was like 16 and my sister was 13. If I had a 16-year-old and 13-year-old right now, I had no emotional skills and no equipping of my mind and my emotional health and ability to empathize, all those things that you said, I'd be freaking crazy too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So there's a lot of empathy there. And I told you this story earlier off camera, but like, about a year ago, I've always wanted Transformers toys.
Yeah.
And there was this kid who's a kid of a family friend of our parents, my mom, and his name was Michael as well. And this kid had every freaking Transformers toy, like just spoiled to the teeth, right? Like I just go in his closet. He just has all the good guys, all the bad guys, and every other toy line too. G.I. Joe, Thundercats, you name it, right? And I just loved going to his house, and he had Nintendo, and like he had all the toys. He was that kid, right? And I was like, I'm going to buy these Transformers, because I always did it like little by little. Like I'd go to a city whenever I was speaking and find a toy shop, and if they had one, I'd buy one. And I was just like, I'm dragging this on. Let me go on eBay. And I just bought like 14 of them. And it was the hardest thing to do, like to pull the trigger. It wasn't even expensive. They weren't the real Transformers. They was the reissues.
Yeah.
They're worthless, right? So I've spent maybe, $600 or whatever. I'm like, you spend more on this on like alcohol in a month. Like, come on, you could do yourself a favor, do something nice for yourself. I order them. They come in the Amazon or the eBay box, like all in one shot. It's like opening a Christmas gift that, like, imagine getting that as a kid. 15 of your favorite toys in one box. Like, oh, and I opened this. I'm like, whoa, this is, okay, I know this was coming, but this is weird. And I'm looking at the packaging and the red packaging. I always loved that as a kid. And then I don't open them. I cannot open them because I'll ruin the value. And then I'm like, you idiot, they're the reissues. They're worthless. Just open it, right? So I open them one by one, like over the course of a couple weeks. And they're like, oh, you realize they're so small? Like I thought they were huge when I was a kid. And that also is like an interesting thing where like our memories feel so much bigger like than the reality sometimes. Like you ever go back to like your old high school or the house or apartment you grew up in, or maybe the first one that you lived in?
Yeah, when
like
I go to New York.
Married?
Yeah, if I can, I swing by just to look.
Just like, how do you feel? Like, you're like, gosh, this is weird. It's like so much smaller than I realized, but it was so big back then.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting because the research shows that 50% of our memories aren't accurate. It's totally like all the memories we have. It's mainly also because like we're not looking at the whole picture. Like you just mentioned. Yeah, it's exactly that. And I feel like that's such an important thing. It's hard for us to even be aware of what you just mentioned, like all of the things happening on the inside.
I'm just trying to follow clues. And I am fortunate that he's still alive and he speaks English, and we text and we talk. And there have been some times where I'm like, this is too much to handle. I need some space. I don't totally ghost him, but I'm like, oh, I need a little bit of space. It's really busy in life right now. But I feel like these are gifts that I can give to myself for the rest of my life. Because once he is gone, he's gone, right? I have friends who have lost parents and stuff like that. So there's like this odd beauty in it. And I'm sort of like glad I didn't have Tom Brady's dad or Peyton Manning. This is just my path, and this is just what I've walked. And kind of as we like close up, can you say something about acceptance? And I know that's a little out of left field, but like I feel, especially in the last 2 years, I've just accepted things, not settled, but accepted. Like I accept myself for who I am. I accept the story that I've lived so far. Like it's easy for me to look back on my childhood and be like, I wish that was something different, or I wish I like did all these things when I was a teenager. And like that doesn't help.
Yeah.
I love what you said about you just like pointing out things that were good about yourself. I had the same feeling. I mean, we must be in synchronicities or something. I was on a flight, and I tend to think much better on flights. And maybe it's just something about being higher up in the air. I think about bigger picture things. Yeah. So I don't do any work on planes anymore. I sleep and I journal. And I was thinking about all the things that I like about friends, or even like romantic partners that I might have had or want in one, or about other people. It's so easy. My family, my nephews, it's so easy to point out what I like about them. It's so hard for me to point out what I like about myself. So I started begrudgingly. I like that you read a lot of books. I'm like, oh, this is so stupid. I like that you're really into personal growth. I like that you face the music and take responsibility for it. It just felt so stupid. And then I wrote all the things I don't like. That was very easy.
Yeah.
And then I wrote this sentence and said, but even if these things never change, I still love you.
Yes.
And that was like, whoa, there was like a shift there. So I think I finally got to accept.
Yes.
Just accept. And there's a million things that we can think about, right? I don't like how my body is, or I don't like this about my face, or I don't like how I think, or I'm too tall, I'm too short. It's like stuff that you literally can't change. And then there's other emotional things, right? Do you feel like you're at that point now where you accept? And when you work with clients and they get to that point, is that like a turning point for them?
Yes. I got a lot better at it, right? Like that's kind of what I've putting in so much effort into. But yeah, like that's, you're describing what would be the secret weapon, is the ability to accept things the way they are, accept yourself the way you are. Because otherwise you're too busy regretting the past, and you're stuck in that world of like, oh, I wish this was different. It's like, well, if it should have been different, it would have been what should have happened, right? Yeah. Or you're busy in the future going, I don't like this thing right now, so I'm busy off in the future. And then your empathy, you see what I'm saying? Your empathy's turned off. You continue to use people. You continue to go in transactional relationships. The moment you can accept things the way they are right now, that's the skill. And the hardest part for people is because it's uncomfortable to accept the way things are right now, and still have your own back anyway. And I think that's everything. So what I realized, I was very fortunate with like having like the viral article that helped launch my coaching business and all of that. But I realized, that was the secret weapon for me in my coaching sessions. I trusted their feelings. A lot of coaches, they're very crappy coaches in the beginning because they get very uncomfortable when your client is having like a meltdown or like a really tough scenario, and they're busy trying to like in the fight mode, like, let's fix this. I learned very quickly to accept it, being like, okay, there's something here. It's trying to communicate with my client. My client's feelings is trying to talk to my client's mind to try to help my client's mind get back in balance. I will trust these feelings. I'm okay. I accept, like, I don't react to their feelings. And I just sit there, no matter how crazy the story gets. The stories of, and I cry too, right? In some of these stories, I'm bawling too. But I know these feelings are trying to help my client. So I learned to accept it, and I help guide them to try to help them accept it too. And the moment they accept it, is the thing that frees them to start accepting the truth. And the truth is always actually empowering. All those narratives we create, the moment you realize, wait, this isn't real at all, it's just like the best feeling ever, right? And then when they have that moment, you know it, like you know it because you feel it in the moment. And it has everything to do with acceptance. It's I accept him, does my client accept him? That's what I realized was made me an effective coach, because a lot of coaches don't accept their clients' feelings. They view it as a problem. I got to fix you. I'm like, that's not how this works. And yeah, I think that's the gift that the science has shown me on like how to navigate that. I know a lot of great therapists know this too, right? But like that was the key, is acceptance.
So good. Dude, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you.
Profoundly insightful.
Always a pleasure.